thank you, Ari. That's such a kind and generous introduction. It's always great to hear what's going on at CSP. I mean, it is really amazing that we're up to so many programs. I was there at the very inception, the birth, so to speak, and it's still going strong and getting stronger. So that's wonderful. Okay, so I'm of the belief that a person needs to know their sin, right? People sin a lot with their hands, with their money, with their genitals, with their eyes. People tend to backslide and get into trouble in various ways. My sin of choice is running my big fat mouth. Okay, and Ari knows that, and Ari and I are we are similar in some sense in that way. You know, you like to talk, you think you're funny, you end up hurting somebody. You like to talk, you think you're funny, you end up revealing a secret. You like to talk, you think you're funny, you end up, you know, arrogating yourself over somebody else. So language is a very, very powerful thing, and you know, the Book of Numbers gets its Latin name, numeri, numbers, from the fact that it contains many censuses, or begins actually with an account, a repetitive account, a census of the contributions of the various tribal leaders to the tabernacle in the desert. But it's really not about numbers. One of the things that the Latins got wrong about the Jewish scriptures, it's actually about words. And that's why it begins with the word vayidaber, and God spoke. And it is called in Hebrew, the book of BEMIDBAR, the book of goings on, trials and tribulations in the desert. Okay, now in a second, we will adumbrate, we will shed some light on the concept of the relationship of desert and speech. But as I like to do in each of these talks, and it's amazing to me that we're already on the fourth book of the Bible. Ari, I remember when we had this idea for doing this, and it's now almost, it's 3/4 of a year ago, right? So, you know, we've been through now 3, but now the 4th of the 5 Chumashim, the 5 books of Moses, the 5 divisions of the Hebrew Bible. And each time I like to sort of go back and talk about what occurred previously and sort of forecast a bit about what will continue in the future and the relationship between these things. So if we go back to Bereshis, if we go back to the first book of the Bible, the connection with speech and language and words is very obvious. The entire world is created through language, right? God says, let light be, and light is, right? Ironically and pleasantly and delightfully, as we said when we discussed Genesis, there's this very interesting idea that we have people, scribes, whose métier, whose stock in trade, whose profession is words, right? Scribes are writing a document, the Bible, in which they create a character, God. And when I say create a character, I mean that, because whatever God is, right, what we have in the Bible is the created character, the imagined character of God, right, as written down by human hands, right? They create a character who then turns around and returns the favor, because just as God is created through words, God creates the world through words. So the connection of Bereshit, of the beginnings of our world as we understand it, with words, with verbality, with literature, is endemic. It's completely part and parcel of the whole story. In fact, I would argue that when we say that the world is 5,782 years old, we obviously don't mean that geologically or chronologically. What we're talking about is the dawn of human literary consciousness, right? The world as we know it is born some 6,000 years ago when people start having a sense of writing and literature and transmission of ideas through words. right? People obviously told stories to each other for a long time, but getting those words out there, publishing them, is really the beginning of our world. In the book of Exodus, Shemot, right? The first encounter of Moses with God is described as a moment in which Moses goes out with the sheep of his father-in-law Yitro, the priest of Midian, le'achar hamidbar, beyond the desert, right? Now, midbar, mem daled beit resh, has the word davar, word, as part of it. And we have to explain the connection of midbar with davar, and the Midrash and Rashi, the great medieval biblical commentator, takes us up on that challenge and says that the midbar is a place that is empty of distraction. The desert, the wilderness, is a place that is empty of distraction. And so when words are spoken, they carry weight. In the midst of the silence, the meditative silence of the wilderness, words have meaning, words have weight, words can be listened to, words can be apprehended. Also, the midbar, the wilderness, is a place that doesn't belong to any particular person or group, right? It is nature par excellence. And so God giving out God's words, rather than speaking in a capital, right? The voice of God coming from Jerusalem, the voice of God coming from Babylon, the voice of God coming from Rome or from Athens. God gives the Torah in a place that is not the possession of anyone, because the Torah is the possession of everyone who can understand, who can hear, who can re-articulate its words. The book of Leviticus is interesting because the book of Leviticus describes the ceremonies, the rituals in the temple, and I should say the tabernacle, which eventually transferred to the temple. And what's interesting about Leviticus is that Leviticus is very much a book of the hands. It's a book of doing. Take this animal and slaughter it in this way and sprinkle its blood here and burn this incense and do, right? It's a book that involves the hands. But of course, without instructional videos on YouTube, right, it articulates the ceremonies and the rituals again through words. And at the heart of Leviticus, when all this blood and sacrifice and incense, right, is going on, at the heart of Leviticus is a purification ceremony for a very strange disease called tzaraat, often translated leprosy. We don't know really what it was. It was some sort of skin disease of some sort, but it could also affect houses and clothing, right? And all the commentators from the very earliest understand one thing about this disease, which is that it comes about as a result of what's called lashon hara. Lashon is a tongue, but it also means language. So evil language, gossiping, tale-bearing, right? Speaking about others. And the laws of lashon hara are very broad and encompass very many things. So for instance, in their fullest articulation, one is not even allowed to say good things about people in certain circumstances. Why? If I have 3 children and I overpraise one child, it doesn't matter that I denigrate the other. I do not denigrate the other children. If I overpraise the one child, the other children are going to feel bad, right? So there are circumstances where even saying something positive can have negative repercussions. And certainly the negative repercussion in Leviticus is that speaking lashon hara is the source of an actual physical manifestation, an actual physical disease. Now, these things sound strange to us. They sound very reductive or very magical. You know, if you God forbid, if you speak ill of people, you'll get cancer, right? But as we begin to understand the mind-body connection and the connection between individuals and the universe more generally, we are at a point in the almost mid-21st century where we can really understand, for instance, the second paragraph of the Shema, which says, if you disobey God, the environment will rebel against you, right? So, previous generations said, that's Narishkeit. We should take it out of the Shema. It sounds too instrumentalist. Like, if you're bad, God will punish you there won't be rain, right? Now we really understand that among God's commandments are commandments that link people to people and people to the environment. And if you start to neglect those dicta, those commandments that link us to each other and make us responsible, arevim, zeh bazeh, connected, woven one into the other, where our boundary and the boundary of the other is not so clear, and where we are connected in a stewardship relationship with our entire world and the universe, we realize that when we disregard God's commandments, we're talking about moral commandments, we're talking about relational commandments, it actually has an effect. We become people who are cavalier about taking care of our environment, and our environment, as we see, right, will therefore no longer take care of us. So when we say that Lashon Hara leads to sara'as, right, that speaking evil things leads to this kind of disease, you can imagine many places and contexts and allopathic Western physicians who would tell you nowadays that, it's important to keep your mental and emotional universe in order because they affect your physical universe, right? It's important when you're healthy, and alachas kama v'kama, how much more so is it important when you're ill, right? Having a good attitude is not, unfortunately, as we know, going to cure you of disease, but it will help you in many cases cope with it. And in some cases, it might have a salutary effect. So the book of Leviticus is connecting at its core language with consequences, okay? Now I'm gonna skip BEMIDBAR because that's the subject of our discussion today and talk about Devarim. The last book of the Bible is actually called Words, right? Devarim, Ele HaDevarim, these are the words that Moses speaks before his death. And the connection of words in that book is Muvan Me'elav, it is self-evident. Now, what about the book of BEMIDBAR? Okay? The Torah is given in the Midbar because it is a place of speech. You see, when Moses goes out with his sheep of his father-in-law, he goes la'achar hamidbar, beyond the place of speech, and he has this intense experience where he experiences God as in the form or as being encompassed by this bush that is burning with fire and yet remains fresh, right? That is an idea, a vision that is beyond language, though it must be obviously described in language. And what Moses does there is apprehends God through experience. The Torah is given through words, BEMIDBAR, because the desert with its quietness, with its ownerlessness, is the place of speech. And Torah is given in human language. So there's a story that begins in Bereshit and continues in Shemot of language creating the universe, of the idea of being beyond language and within language, the idea of language creating a people when the Torah is given, which creates a people, right? And it's interrupted by Leviticus, which speaks about language, as I indicated. But Leviticus is the story of a creation of a container for intimate speech, of the tabernacle, of the temple, right? You recall that God's voice appears in thunder and lightning on Sinai. And then in the book of Leviticus, God speaks from the empty space between the outstretched wings of the angels, the Kruvim, the Sphinxes, on top of the ark in the tabernacle. Nobody hears that voice. It is a still, small voice called the Mamadaka, and it symbolizes the voice of God in the tabernacle of the heart. And so you have Bereshit, God creates the world through language. Shemot, God reveals God's self through language. Vayikra is in the middle. Vayikra, which a book that Ari doesn't like much, right, is the heart, literally, of the 5 books of Moses. That's why they're 5, an uneven number, because Vayikra is the heart. Vayikra is the containment for the still small voice. And one needs to make those arba amot, those 4 cubits of space from which God speaks in an intimate way. And then the story continues in BEMIDBAR, and it ends, only to begin again, in Devarim. Now in BEMIDBAR, the story deepens, continues, deepens, and becomes tragic. And that's why I called it the trials and tribulations of the desert. In BEMIDBAR, mouths are everywhere. Mouths. In 4 roughly successive parshiot, we learn over and over in different ways that mavis v'chayim biyad halasha, death and life are in the power of the tongue. In Parshat Behaloscha, this week's Parsha coming up, it is Miriam's Lashon Hara, Miriam's evil speech against her brother Moshe, not as the representative of the entire Jewish people, but as an individual that is something that is fraught with terrible consequences, right? So if you recall in Numbers, the famous Parsha that's coming up this week in Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron begin to talk against Moshe, Odot Aisha Akushit Asher Lakach, because of the Cushite wife that he had taken, and then it tells us parenthetically, for he had married a Cushite. So Cush is a place that is in Upper Egypt, maybe Ethiopia, right? Sometimes translated as Ethiopian. The question of why they were against her is a good one. Was it because she was not an Israelite? Was it because she was foreign in general? Did they have something against Ethiopians? Or was it against the fact that she was Black and there is color prejudice, right? It seems to be the final one for a reason that I will explain in a second. And they said, does God only speak through Moses? They said, God speaks through us too, right? Now, God hears this, but the text of the Torah written by Moses, by tradition, says Moses was a very humble man, more humble than anyone else on the face of the earth, which is a very cool thing to write if you're a humble man, right? Imagine Moses writing it down, right? I have to say, I'm a very humble man, and one of my greatest virtues is my humility, right? So, God speaks to them and says, look, when there's a prophet, I reveal myself to a prophet in visions, like I do to you. I talk to you in visions and dreams. Not so, my servant Moses. I speak to him face to face, and as we shall see, mouth to mouth, right? Not in riddles. He sees the form of God, right? Why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses, right? Now, what's going on, right? Miriam and Aaron have a specific complaint, and that complaint is an intimate complaint. They speak on behalf of Zipporah, Moses' wife. Excuse me. They speak on behalf of Zipporah, who is Moses' wife, and they notice, say the rabbis, that Moses is not having sex with his wife. And they're like, oh, he's not having sex with his wife because he spoke to God, and he speaks to God all the time, and he has to be in a state of ritual purity, so he can't sully himself with sexual relations. What about us? We're married. We have marital relations all the time, and we speak to God. God says, no, it's not the same thing, right? Now, God detects in Miriam's heart something else, and God causes Miriam's flesh to whiten with sarat. So God detects a color prejudice on the part of Miriam and says, you think you're so white in relation to Tzipporah, you'll be whiter now, right? And she gets saras, this disease that's about Lashon Hara. So in Behalotecha, the story is about Miriam and Aaron's Lashon Hara against an individual, right? Moses as an individual in a very personal way. Then we have Parshat Shlach Lecha. In Parshat Shlach Lecha, it's not anymore Miriam's mouth against an individual, but the mouths of the 12 spies, the 12 investigators that Moshe sends out to check out the land of Israel, and they come back with discouraging news about the land of Israel. They betray the Israelites, and the spies are later warned that because of the deficiencies and moral and ritual behavior of the Israelites, the land of Israel will vomit out the people of Israel, right? Will vomit out, right? So here you have Lashon Hara, but it's not about a person in the way we normally engage in Lashon Hara. It's about an inanimate thing, the land of Israel, and it results in tragic consequences. A crime of the mouth is punished by the expulsion by the mouth, the vomiting out of the Israelites of the land of Israel. Then, too, land, that inanimate thing, becomes a site of punishment in the next week, in Parshat Korach, when the earth opens its mouth, as the verse states, in an earthquake that swallows Korach and his crew. For what? For speaking against Moses, right? Now, this is not Moses as a man. This is Moses and Aaron as the representatives of God on earth. And that's what the complaint is. And not only are Korach and his supporters swallowed alive, but all their property, their possessions, their livestock goes down with them. Every sheep, every horse, every camel, every donkey. And so, in a chain that continues with Parshat Balak, the mouth of a mere piece of livestock, Balaam's ass, Balaam's donkey, is miraculously open when Balaam uses his mouth to speak curses against the people of Israel. Now, in BEMIDBAR, these crimes against the Israelite Holy Trinity, the land of Israel, the God of Israel, and the people of Israel, all the results of Lashon Hara, of evil speech, are punished by various mouths. The mouth of the land of Israel, the mouth of the earth more generally, and even the mouth of an ass. Lashon Hara against the land of Israel is punished by vomiting out of the mouth of the land of the Israelites. Lashon Hara against the divinely appointed leadership and thus rebellion against God is punished by the descent alive into the mouth of the earth which, as the psalmist tells us, is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And Balaam, that false prophet, that ass who would curse with Lashon Hara the people of Israel, is punished appropriately through the mouth of the very ass upon which he rides. Now, this obsession with mouths, speech, reward, punishment, beginnings, endings, will culminate in Dvarim, when finally God brings about the death of Moses by means of a kiss. And this is interesting. It says that Moses dies there the Arvot Moav, in the plains of Moab, al pi Hashem, by the mouth of the Lord. Now, this obviously means by the decree of the Lord. Okay, but let me just, just as we said before, kind of mind-blowing thing, that sometimes a compliment can actually be lashon hara if there's a circumstance or a context where it's problematic, right? We think of the rabbis as non-literal, right? They're going to be very adventurous and very literary and very imaginative in the stories they tell, in the way they tell stories, etc. But there are circumstances and there are contexts in which the rabbis choose to be literal in order to say something wildly imaginative, right? So if I say Al Pi Hashem, I should translate, right, by the decree of God, that Moses dies by the decree of God. But they translate literally by the mouth of God. And so in their insistence, they create the mysterious and beautiful image of Moses, with whom God spoke, as we just noted, panim el panim, face to face, as a person speaks with a friend. So you imagine, right? A romantic situation where you have somebody as a friend and you really like them, and maybe you have a deeper connection with them, but something keeps you apart, and you're speaking closely and intimately into the night, face to face, literally, right? And you get closer and you get closer, and maybe if it's a romantic story, and I hope it has a happy ending, right? You kiss. So Moses, who spoke with God, panim el panim, face to face, as it says, the way a person speaks with a friend, is kissed by that friend, and his soul departs. Right? Thus, as God blew breath and animation into the first human, breath, animation, and as we say, language, right? God brings an end to the greatest human bringer of words into the world, right? So there's a cycle of mouths, speech, reward, punishment, creation, death, beginning, and ending, in which the book of Numbers, really let's call it the book of words, if we're to be honest, is at the center. Now, this didn't escape the notice of art made for Jews, and I want to show you a couple of examples. These are two images that some of you may have seen before, but I want to discuss them in a new context, because to me, art is hafoch ba v'hafech ba dekala ba, twist it and turn it, because everything is within it. And, there is a limited number of images that exist, but when we look at them, we can learn something new and different about them each time. So here is an image of the opening of the book of BEMIDBAR from a book called The Duke of Sussex Ashkenazi Pentateuch, that is normally in the British Museum, but that I actually stole, and I have, as I'm showing you here now. It's a chumash, and it has, in 3 columns, it has all the text. And at the beginning of the book of each book, chumash book, it contains an illustration. And this one is a fascinating illustration, which I discussed before when I gave a talk on monsters, if you recall. I talked about these monsters and their ethnicity and their placement, and these knights and who they are. B'kitzur, to make a long story short, this, although it may not seem to be, is an illustration for the opening of book of BEMIDBAR of the encampment of the Israelites in the desert. And here we have 4 knights who represent the 4 principal tribes around the tabernacle. And you see them here with their standards, with their banners, each with a different animal upon it. And you have these 4 monsters, which all symbolize the trials and tribulations of the Israelites in the desert. Very fascinating. I don't want to look at that. I want to look at this. This is the tabernacle. What do I mean? This is the tabernacle. This is the word Vayidaber. But the creators of this manuscript, the Jewish patrons who commissioned this manuscript from a non-Jewish artisan, specified that the form and the shape of the tabernacle as an architectural construction, as a tent or what have you, would not appear in the picture, but simply the first word of the book of Numbers, Vayidaber, and God spoke. That word Vayidaber represents the tabernacle because what the tabernacle housed in essence was Kol Demamadaka, the still small voice of God, the speech of God. What Jews in the first century before the Common Era and after called the Logos, the word, Davar Hashem, and what Christians picked up as the divine word. Okay, so that's one image I want to show you. I want to show you another image, which is will be equally strange and bizarre to you, particularly if you haven't, heard my talk on monsters. This is an image that at first glance seems to be kind of normal until you look closer. This is an image from a machzor, a festival poetry compendium for the various high holidays and festivals, and this is for Shavuos, the holiday that we just passed, and it's the beginning of a piyut, a liturgical poem called Adon Imnani. The Lord was my nursemaid. Very interesting poem, and it shows at the top, it's all rubbed out, angels or the hands of angels with shofars and trumpets blowing. And here a mountain which is ablaze with golden flames, and here flowers and fleur-de-lis, and here the tablets of the commandments, and here a young beardless Moses, and here Aaron, the high priest dressed as a bishop, all very interesting, but not for discussion today. And here a series of Jewish men with their peculiar hats, something for a discussion another time, and here behind them a series of Jewish women. And the Jewish women have the heads of a variety of animals. And I've discussed before how they maintain their dignity in spite of this sort of animal aspect and what that might mean. Try to ignore the elephant in the room for a second, their animal heads, and let's think about what's going on here, okay? The Israelite men have their gaze mediated through Moses and Aaron at the law, right? The women, on the other hand, and here's a better image that you can see more clearly. The women, on the other hand, look upward and they are gazing at the first letter of the poem, which is the letter Aleph. And as some of you may know, the legend, the rabbinic midrash has it, that when God came to speak the 10 commandments, God did not speak Hebrew because God was afraid that in speaking the language with which the world came into being, after all, God used the Hebrew language, the whole world might fall again into chaos. So God spoke Egyptian and said, instead of Ani, I am the Lord, Anochi, Enoki in Middle Egyptian is I. But of course, that's a midrash, and that word Anochi is a plenty decent Hebrew word, a biblical Hebrew word. Doesn't matter. What matters is that the first letter of Anochi is Aleph, as it is the first letter of this poem. And these women, with their beautiful, sort of well-proportioned, elegant bodies, and their frankly gentle and focused animal heads, are looking up at this letter. And that letter, the letter Aleph, symbolizes the articulation of language. The letter Aleph in Hebrew has no sound. It's the opening of the glottis. When you put a vowel to it, it can be a or e or u or e. But it in of itself is the point, the tiny point, the mother of all sounds, the mother of all language. And it's that the women are perceiving. They're perceiving language in its purity at Sinai. And so we have a number of medieval examples. Are you still there? 1 second. Yes. You have a number of medieval examples in which the artists translated into images the idea of the word. Words have meaning. This is the message of all those parshiot of Sefer BEMIDBAR. Words have power. Mavis v'chayim biyad halashon. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Words create worlds, as we learn in Bereshis. Words loosely and unthinkingly dispersed can cause untold harm, as we see in BEMIDBAR, the new Chumash we have just begun. Words vomited out thoughtlessly are like the feather pillow in the famous Hasidic tale. Do you know the story? An inveterate spreader of gossip is dismayed when their words end up causing unexpected and unwanted pain, actually to themselves. And that person is taught a lesson by the Rebbe, by the charismatic teacher, who tells the person to go out to the marketplace and to take a pillow stuffed with goose feathers and to beat it until the seams break and the feathers fly out into the wind. Now, says the Rebbe, go and collect each and every feather. But I cannot, protests the gossip. They have flown too far and too fast, and I do not know where all of them have gotten to. So it is with language. We need to weigh our words very carefully, because speech is a divine gift. Maybe it's the divine gift. Words are the only treasure that comes to us from heaven. And once those words leave our mouths, we do not know where they will end up. You know, there was a great Jewish thinker. His name was Jesus. Maybe you heard of him. He once found himself in the presence of a group of Jews who seemed to him to be inordinately concerned with the ins and outs and the legalities of pure and impure foods. And he said this to them, admonishing them: perhaps you should obsess less about what is going into your mouth and be more concerned about what comes out of it. I can think of no better summary of the book of BEMIDBAR, the book of In the Desert, the book of And God Spoke, than that idea. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the discussion here. We have a few minutes for follow-up chat, and I have a few questions to ask already, but let me just open up the chat, see if it works. Okay, everyone, here you go. So as much as I do not enjoy, Leviticus, Vayikra, I do love BEMIDBAR, and it could just be because my bar mitzvah parsha is Bahalotcha, which is this parsha of this week. My dad's bar mitzvah parsha is Naso, so we're a very BEMIDBAR centered priestly family. Who knows?
And my kids, two of my kids' bar mitzvahs are Shlachacha. Edward, by the way, I see your message. You're correct, right? Right? Vaidaber, correct. Okay, go ahead.
So, question about talking and not talking. In fact, in the story of Moses, isn't the reason he's then not allowed to go into is because he did one situation where he did not talk. Mm-hmm. He actually struck. So how does that fit into your?
Beautiful. So in Koheles, the author of Koheles, ostensibly Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, says, "Eis lishtok ve'eis ledaber." There's a time to be quiet and there's a time to speak, and that actually is applied by the rabbis to the circumstance of lashon hara. That's l'shebach ve'lo l'gnai. That lashon hara, evil speech that is praiseful, can still be evil depending on the circumstances. And there are times to speak and there are times to act. And if we act when we should speak, right, then we can cause great harm, right? Think about potching a kid when you could talk to the kid, right? And if we speak when we should act, then we can cause also great tragedies, because then we run our mouths, right, without actually taking the action that we need to take in the world. So, so Moses is an example of hitting rather than speaking, and I will leave it to you, you know, depending on your views on gun control, to think about instances in which people run their mouths without acting sufficiently.
Thank you. Jesus and gun control already. So you're
Yes.
getting good there. Diana wants to know the kind of the place and date of the Aleph image you showed us with the women.
That's
who are looking up.
that's about 1320, and it is in it's from the Lake Cologne region of what is now Germany, and it's in a large book called the Tripartite Machzer, which is dispersed now into 3 libraries. One part is in Budapest, which I saw 2 weeks ago. One part is in the British Library, and one part is at Oxford.
Thank you. Gail wants to know, how come Aaron doesn't get punished for that little Lashon Hara party?
That's a good question. And also, what was each person's part in it? So it could be that that Miriam is punished. I think Miriam is punished not for what she says, but what she thinks of Zipporah. You know, that is the whiteness, right, in response. And that Aaron is admonished but not punished because the taina, the argument, was a logical argument. Like, we have sex with our spouses all the time, but you know, but you don't. That's the problem, right? You know, are you holier than us? Essentially, Aaron's question, or Aaron and Miriam's question, is the same question that Korach asks eventually, right? Right? Your nation is all a holy nation, and God is in our midst. Why do you arrogate yourself over us? But it's true. It's an excellent question. Yes.
In putting this series together for us, have you kind of rethought the Chumash a bit to come up with this approach, or is this something that's always been percolating?
Totally. Actually, I set myself a challenge, which is that every time that I have to speak here, you know, I spend like a week looking at the sources and blah, blah, blah. Then I put it all away. Then I go out someplace and I just meditate in nature and think about how these things that I've been reading connect with one another, and I come up with some strands. So Arnold says, you know, you never really thought of this as a series of stories about the consequences of the spoken word. And I thank you, Arnold, for your commentary. Actually, that came up just thinking about, you know, the Vaydaber, right? You know, the Vaydaber, Edward, okay? The beginning of the book of BEMIDBAR, okay?
We have 2 hands up. So Ruth Lavort, if you have a question you would like to ask, please ask. Please put it in a question mode. Hold on. Go ahead. Ruth, are you there?
Okay, got it. Had to hit the unmute. Thank you very much. This was so thought-provoking.
My pleasure.
My question is kind of a stretch, but when you mentioned the word for Miriam's affliction, I was wondering if it was related to the Yiddish expression of tsuris.
Tsuris, yeah. So it's not etymologically related to tsar in Hebrew, but there are a variety of etymologists from Levita to, I think Ibn Ezra might have it, that try to connect it with tsar. It may have some kind of, you know, phonological, but not etymological connection. That is, it sounds the same, right? It sounds like a trouble, right? A tsar, right? But it's not quite, it's probably not related to it at root. Thank you very much, Ruth.
Anita points out that the word davar, ledaber, to speak, also means a thing. At least that's where we use it, davar.
Right.
I don't know if that's how it's used in the biblical sense, by the way, but
It's
that's how we use it today.
It's both. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, you could say et hadavar hazeh, meaning this matter. It's really, you know, it's the neutral meaning. So you have speech and you have object, right? And philologists talk about speech objects, but okay, is speech object, and then in the middle there's something you would describe as matter. So hadavar hazeh hayom, right? This matter today, right?
So anyway, that was from Anita. Stuart Hanneman had a question. Stuart, go ahead and pose your question. I'll have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. In number 6, I believe it is, the priestly blessing is God basically delegating to Aaron and the priesthood some of God's efficacious speech, speech capable of, bringing things into being, or, acting out in the world.
Right, that's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Well, it says, "V'samu et shemi al bnei Yisrael v'ani avarechem," right? They, the priests, shall put my name, right, upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them. So there is some idea of atzilut, of the distillation, right, of the divine through these human people. Not that they are divine themselves, but they are channels, effectively. And the idea of the matara, the goal of the blessing is that my name be. I'm sorry, we have sirens. That my name be effectuated upon the people of Israel. So here's the thing with God's name. God's name, as you know from Shemot, from that scene with the burning bush, God is a verb, right? It's Yud Hey Vav Hey, which is a sort of amalgam of Hayah Hoveh Yeh, right? God was, God is, God will be, and that God is a process. God is a verb. And by saying V'samu et shmi al bnei Yisrael, it means that these 3 blessings, that God should preserve you in your physical life, right? That God should cause those who come in contact to you to be sort of lit up from your own presence, right? Yichunecha, I should say. Edward, Yichuneka, right? You should have chen, you should have beauty in their eyes, and that God should give you stasis, God should give you rest, God should give you peace, God should give you completion, God should give you harmony, God should give you perfection. When I give over this idea of God as a process working in the universe, in the individual, through this blessing, then I have put, so to speak, as God, my name, so to speak, upon the people, and that brings a blessing. Beautiful. Thank you so much. That was very.
Thank you. One more question, then we'll wrap it up. Tybal, go ahead. Question?
Yes. So in addition to the beauty of all your words, you said something that made my jaw drop, which was the saying that 5782, rather than being seen as the creation of the world, is more, sorry if I misspeak, but literary history, or the history of words. It makes me want to go read Seder Olam Rabbah again with that point of view. Right. And I'm just interested in how you came to that, that chidush, that new thing, right. If you've written about it, if you have anything more.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so kind. And also thank you to everybody for saying such kind things about my talks. It's very, very gratifying. Tybal, I came to that, I guess I came to that because, you can't read the account of the age of the world and take it literally. Nobody can, beginning with Maimonides, and Maimonides' son, Reb Avraham ben Rambam, has a whole, in his Perush HaTorah, his Sufi Perush HaTorah has a whole idea. He says only a fool would think of this literally, but there is a number, right? So I'm not thinking about, use the word literary, I'm thinking about a moment in actual history where, through the medium of words, whether written or not, I don't know, the idea of the story and of our story and of telling our story becomes sort of a broadcast, right? Rather than talking to the self or even talking to a small group. The idea that we could broadcast our ideas out in the world through words. And I date it roughly then. I'm not an anthropologist. I don't know if you can do that historically. That's my way of coping with this very small number relative to the age of humankind. I also find comfort in the idea that Rosh Hashanah is described in the liturgy as Hayom Haras Olam. Today is the day of the pregnancy of the world. Today, the world became impregnated. And so I asked myself, what does the world become impregnated with? The world becomes impregnated with the ability through humans to tell its own story. And so I'd like to leave you with that.
Very nice.
Knows where to find me, all right?
So before we wrap it up, a few things. Number one is thank you. We have our last in the series coming up, right? In actually just a few weeks for some reason. Maybe it's BEMIDBAR is a shorter book than I thought. My bar mitzvah parsha seemed long.
We started a little, your bar mitzvah portion seemed long. Well, I tell you that reading those aliyot of the gifts of the Nesi'im last week in the Torah, you know, because Agi and I read alternate aliyot, and you know, I happen to get the fifth or something. It's endless and repetitive.
Yeah, but once you know it, see if it's your bar, that wasn't my bar, that's a naso. But once you know one, you can read the whole parsha.
Of course, right? that is for sure.
So what I wanted people to know about, first of all, is, you know, with our CSP store, I keep adding stuff. So the most recent stuff I'm playing with is the Vulcan, you know, Live Long and Prosper, which is really my Kohen thing, and I've been playing with it. So now I have a CSP shirt in there that says like Live Long and Prosper Community Scholarship Program, but coming out in the next few days is actually the hand with the Kohen's blessing in English. I'll send it to you to take a look at for me, Mark. It's one hand actually. So take a look at it, Mark.
Only half a blessing.
Well, it's a T-shirt. If I put two in there, it creates problems, particularly depending on the gender who's wearing it. So I keep.
Now I get it. Well, it doesn't matter the gender, right? You know.
Well, it doesn't matter, but you know what I mean. So, you know, one of the things Mark and I are working on is Mark doing an Italy trip for us in March. So, Mark, you want to do any as we go out from this? Do you want to say anything real quick about why people should?
I'd love to see as many people as possible on a trip to Italy. We're going to do a high-end
in March,
this coming March, high-end trip to Italy. That's Jewish Italy. A few sites. Some of you have been to Italy before, but you haven't been to Italy in this way. We have excellent guides, unique experiences, wonderful places to stay. And
where are we going?
Excuse me?
Which part of Italy?
Going to Venice, which is where I spend a lot of time, and to Florence, and to Padua, and to Rome, and to Siena, and to a tiny place called Conegliano Veneto, which was the little Jerusalem. And in all those places, you will meet natives, you will eat well, you will learn stuff that you didn't know before. And if you can stand it, you'll have me as your educator. So we're hoping to do that. It's you know, after COVID, getting trips together is really like parting the Red Sea. So we're working on it now. And if you're interested, you should contact Ari and get on his mailing list for that. So it's been a pleasure to see you all. And I hope to see you for Dvarim, and maybe at some other time as we go ahead. All right?
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
So,
keep well, keep safe.
Feel well.
Ahuva, it's always nice studying with you.
Yes.
And Rosa as well, Rosa Berman. You know, Rosa takes notes and then gives Dvar Torahs at her shul. So I'm sure there's going to be a good Dvar Torah coming up.
Excellent.
At Sinai Temple. Okay, take care, everybody. Okay, well, good to see you. Faith Hirschler, nice to see you as well. Marsha Weiser, and I see Rosie LaBelle. Okay, Edward Lacker, I got to go. Louise Sherby, take care. Bob and Rita, maybe we'll meet in person sometime very soon. I have a dinner planned in August. You'll get invited. Bye, everybody.